Hello, I'm Karen Love Basinger, the pastor at Florence United Methodist Church, and you'll find us in the middle of the dunes on the windswept Oregon coast. We're so happy that you're here with us, and this is a really unprecedented time that we're living in, and we hope that this time that we're spending together will help you find meaning and purpose more and more in your life. You know, filmmaker Ken Burns has spent his career documenting American history, and he always considered the three crises in the nation's past were the Civil War, the Depression, and World War II. But then came the unprecedented perfect storm of 2020, and Burns thinks that we might be living through America's fourth greatest crisis, and perhaps the worst one yet. In fact, now about as many people or more people have died from the coronavirus than died in World War II. So he says we're beset by three viruses, are we not? There's a year-old coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus, but there's also the 402-year-old virus of white supremacy and racial injustice. And we've got an age-old human virus of misinformation, of paranoia, of conspiracies. So what we're going to be working with today in our service is we're going to be focused on the pandemic of the particular pandemic of the coronavirus, of the COVID-19. Which is mutating, and so it could, we might be dealing shortly with COVID-21. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is to join with me in a prayer for our invocation. Oh God, we come before you as a people gathered to behold the Christ. A light dawned that cannot be extinguished. In this new year, we offer special thanks for this community of faith gathered here in the cyber world and your faithful presence wherever we are. Help us to see more clearly your glorious light, that we will open our hearts to your reign on earth and dedicate our lives to your service. In the name of the Christ we pray. Amen. And now my beloved husband, Alan, is going to be joining with me in our call to worship. And as we read responsively, when we read together, that will represent the entire congregation. For people in darkness, Christ is the light. For people in despair, Christ is the hope. For people grieving, Christ is a comfort. For people burdened, Christ is a friend to share the load. For people anxious, Christ is calm assurance. For all the people gathered here, Christ is for you. Hear the call to follow Christ and be Christ to others. For all in this place, let your praise arise. Amen.
These times are getting the best of me. My mind, my soul, my tired body, my whole being is off. I keep looking for something familiar, something foundational, something solid that makes me feel secure. I think of you and search for a sermon, verse, or song, anything that used to soothe my troubles, feed my soul, enliven my spirit, keep me going. I want a message from a resistant prophet, I want an invitation to leave work and come see miracles. I want to know you love and protect me. I long to feel safe. Just come up strong around me. Hold me. You know, I used to think of you differently. I was so sure, so certain I had it all figured out. But then I experienced loss and emptiness and inhumanity and insanity and realized I had to grow up. I left all that I knew to know you, the you beyond the metaphors, the eternal, true God. You are more than I expected. Nothing and no one on earth is like you. There isn't anything that measures up to your love. It never loses, and it never leaves. You are the living will. You are the enduring love. You are the speaking word. You are the stabilizing matter, the ground of all being. Reassure us in our time of need, God. Surround us and secure us in your love. There isn't anything that measures up to your love. It never loses, and it never leaves.
You only asked me to follow humbly. Oh Lord, with your eyes you have searched me, and while smiling have spoken my name. Now my boat's left on the shoreline behind me. By your side I will seek other seas. You know so well my possessions. My boat carries no gold and no weapons. You will find there my nets and labor. Oh Lord, with your eyes you have searched me, and while smiling have spoken my name. Now my boat's left on the shoreline behind me. By your side I will seek other seas. You need my hands full of caring through my labors to give others rest, and constant love that keeps on loving. Oh Lord, with your eyes you have searched me, and while smiling have spoken my name. Now my boat's left on the shoreline behind me. By your side I will seek other seas. You who have fished other oceans, ever longed for our souls who are waiting. My loving friend has us to call me. Oh Lord, with your eyes you have searched me, and while smiling have spoken my name. Now my boat's left on the shoreline behind me. By your side I will seek other seas. Our God in heaven, holy is your name. Your reign come, your will done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and help us forgive as we have been forgiven. In the time of trial, lead us into light, for yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever.
Okay. Well, here we are in our living rooms, or Bert's in his sunroom. I am so delighted to have this opportunity to have a dialogue sermon with my esteemed colleague, Bert Schneep. And Bert is a pillar of our congregation. For those of you out there in viewer land, in cyber world, who don't know who Bert is, if you were part of this church, if you were able to be with us in-person worship, you would know Bert. He and his wife are, a wonderful foundational part of our church. So Bert, let's take a moment to give them a little of your background, if you don't mind. You're an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church.
That's
And you're
right.
retired, and you are part of the California-Nevada Conference.
That's
Right?
the conference.
And you've both served churches as a pastor, and you've been in a specialized ministry beyond the local church. And you want to say a bit about that, just to...
Well, maybe a couple of additional background.
Okay, good.
My major in college was in zoology and biology, and I taught junior high science for a couple of years before I entered seminary. I did an intern year in California, which is where I met my wife, and we got married. And then I was from Illinois originally, in the Northern Illinois Conference, and then moved to the Cal Nevada Conference, served a church there as an associate for about 8 years, and then at the same time got a master's in marriage and family therapy, and spent my last 18 years in what they call a special appointment in mostly working with children and family and marriage therapy.
Great.
So when we retired, my wife decided we needed to be on the coast because she was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
And so we settled on Florence and have been very pleased to be here.
Yeah, that's great. How long have you been part of the church? You're new. You've got more tenure here than I do, or more longevity.
Well, I've been here about 13 years, 13 or 14 years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, okay. Well, I think this is such a treat and a blessing for the congregation and anybody listening and viewing this to be able to hear your wisdom because from your broad knowledge and experience, education, knowledge, experience. And you're very involved in the adult Christian education of our church. So I think this is going to be good. What I did is, you remember, is I asked you to dialogue with me about the pandemic, like where we are right now, and or how it's impacting you theologically, philosophically, whatever. Just how are you making sense of it? What do you see in it as you process it, this once in a lifetime, hopefully, never before in this lifetime experience that we're having of this pandemic? So yeah, what do you have any initial responses to that? Because I think we're going to continue to have responses.
Well, the primary focus that most of us have been having has been on what is this like now? How is it affecting us in our lives right at this point? And I think that, without a doubt, is what's foremost on almost everyone's mind. As I think about it, like to take a little bit of a longer view and look in terms of the pandemic, that virus mutant that has been infecting so many people. As a part of a larger creation. And as you begin to think about it in terms of a creation, you think about it in terms of the creator. God as being the creator, and in Genesis it talks about God as the creator, and he saw the creation and said it was good. Well, I'm not sure how many folks would come down as somehow the pandemic is good. On the other hand, it is a part of creation. I have often heard people talk about the pandemic or similar kinds of things. We had during our lifetime, or at least for many of us, um, the pandemic that stands out is the AIDS HIV pandemic back in the 80s. And that often was seen as a punishment, that God was punishing those people for sexual aberration, for things that they shouldn't be doing and were. The difficulty with that connection to the pandemic we currently are undergoing is that there's no way that anyone can look at the one we currently are involved with and be able to say, well, it's those people who are having the problems with it. It's not those people, it's all of us. We are all part of it.
Yeah, it's global.
Most pandemics tend to be that kind of a situation where it's, all of us, one way or another, are involved with them. I think it's Professor Wright, Tom Wright, is the author of the study of Paul we're doing in the adult Sunday school class, but another book called God and the Pandemic.
Yeah.
That's a good shot of it. There you go.
There you go.
And in that book, he talks about how frequently pandemics have been a part of the biblical story, and the way he sees most of those in the Bible and the stories that we read there are not pandemics in terms of a way God punishes people, but rather it's seen as a sign. We need to find what is it that the pandemic is trying to get us to do or tell us, and how do we respond to it is far more important than what is it that gave rise to it.
Yeah, why?
So I see that what gave rise to it and so on. And I see that as a part of creation. Creation is dynamic. Creation is continuing. Creation was not done and then it was it.
Evolving.
It's always evolving. There's always something new being occurring. And it's not that God is saying, okay, we're going to do it this way. It's rather, kind of like we say we have free will. The creation itself has free will, and things just occur. Some of them are good and some of them are not so good. The pandemic, at least in my estimation, is one of those things that's not so good.
Yeah.
And I think most people would probably agree with that. But it is an event that occurs, and it's up to us. How do we respond to that pandemic? God has given us tremendous talents, a marvelous brain. I'm not sure that all of us use it in the way God intends for us or intended for us to use it. On the other hand, it has given us some marvelous treatments for diseases. That's God at work. It is given credit is given to the scientists, the medical people that do all of that, but that's God at work through them. And that's what happens and what's needing to take place with this pandemic, and is, because we've come up with now vaccines that are going to be working, but that needs to be done in a continuing way. It needs to continue finding new ways and treatments for those who have it beyond the vaccines to keep people from getting it.
Or we may need more vaccines as the virus mutates.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, as I look at the vaccine or at the pandemic, it's to me kind of a part of creation that we need to, as human beings, to deal with. And we are dealing with it, or not everybody dealing in the same way. some positive, some not so. But it's something that we are called to deal with, to respond to find what is it that God can give us inspiration and help us to be able to somehow manage to to respond to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, this N.T. Wright book really is a Christian reflection on the coronavirus and its aftermath. And it's really so good. It's not very long. It's like 70 something pages. And I think I've mentioned before in various settings we've been in that I think oftentimes we don't see the meaning of some of this stuff while we're in it. I mean, fully. And that it's going to take, you know, years and centuries even maybe to fully get, for instance, how, you know, there's a triple pandemic going on of white supremacy, racism, whatever, you know, the coronavirus and disinformation. And so, you know, looking at this, looking at the Christian reflection, well, you know, I mean, how do we respond? Like you say, it's, you know, it's connecting with God being at work. It's like being the Christ. I see the Christ at work, whether that somebody calls himself a Christian or not, in that doctor or that nurse or that orderly or that, you know, assistant, CNA or whoever, you know, the custodians or all the people working together to help bring healing. That's God. You know, that's that spark of the image of God, I think, in all of us. So anyway, this is, if you get a chance, those of you out there in viewer land, if you get a chance, get this little book. It's only 75 pages or so. It is excellent, I think. And as we are dealing with our response to this, you know, one of the things N.T. Wright really focuses on in the beginning of it is lament. And I think that's something we're not real thrilled about in our culture, is grieving and owning our despair or our doubt or whatever. So do you have any thought or reflection about that, about lament or, yeah, what?
Well, I think a lot of what we identify as lament is in the Psalms, many of which are laments. And even in the lament, somehow to be thankful.
Yeah.
To give thanks to God. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not something that we would usually do in our normal response to things that would give rise to a lament. I think there are two ways of living in response that Wright identifies in his book. One is to respond and live out of fear and anxiety, which I see many people doing in response to this particular pandemic, the virus. You know, I think the fear and the anxiety is probably one of the things that gives rise to much of the anti-masking, the responses of almost violence and at times violence against the things that might be helpful. The second way to find an adequate response is through faith and hope. And that seems to be the opposite. And it's not something that we necessarily automatically come to. We have to really be in prayer, and we have to be focusing on how can and be aware of it, because very often it's the fear and the anxiety that initially take center stage. And it's not easy to get beyond those, but getting beyond those, I think, to the hope and to the faith that we hold, those can not only carry us through, but give us really something to build on
Yeah.
once we get to the end, which at some point the end will come.
Yeah.
At
You mean
some point the pandemic will become controlled, I guess you
Yeah,
could
yeah.
say.
Okay. You mean the end of the pandemic.
The end of the pandemic,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we'll also reach the end at some point for each
Not the,
individual.
not the long, long way off end, but hopefully.
Yeah.
We want this to end much quicker than that.
Yeah.
But at the end of that, we need to come to what are we going to rebuild?
Yes.
Because you referred to a couple of other pandemics, the racism and the misinformation and so forth. Those, I think, have been there all along, but have been really exposed by the virus pandemic.
Yeah. He calls it the 402-year history of, and now he's writing from, the UK.
Mm-hmm.
It's there too. It's global. So,
Yes.
so it's exposed a lot of things that are crumbling, that are wrong, that are unjust and corrupt and this, that, and the other. And so, there's so much focus. We have the new administration that just got inaugurated. And so we got to rebuild our country, in a lot of ways. And we got to rebuild our church when we come out of this church, we got to rebuild the denomination with some unfinished business we got to deal with around the probable schism. But we've got so much rebuilding to do. We've got to rebuild nature, not rebuild it because we're not in control, like you said, but we got to get out of the way and quit harming it and let it regenerate. So we've just got so much rebuilding to do. And so I think, we got to honor our grief. It was so powerful, for Biden to have that grief thing on the eve of his inauguration, the grief ceremony, where he basically acknowledged the reality of grief.
That was like the night before his inauguration.
I know, it was on the eve. It was awesome. And then, to get real and say, hey, we are hurting. We are losing people, and 400 and how many? 10,000 now, or 407, something like that. And he's projecting maybe 500,000 by the end of February. Mm-hmm. So we have, and let me go off on a tangent here for a minute. He does talk about, in the history of the church, Martin Luther, different people, they've had to struggle with how to do no harm. And Martin Luther, he and Catherine, his wife, that ex-priest, ex-nun, and all these kids they had, they would stay behind when other people would leave the city or whatever for safety. And he said, if you need to do that, okay, do that. But they stayed behind and took care of the sick. And so, yeah,
he did point out one of the things that really helped the growth of the Christian faith.
Yes.
Was the response of Christians to pandemics that were involving basically the whole world they knew at that point.
Yeah.
And how the Christians would stay and help while almost everybody else would stay away and try and keep away from everything.
Yeah.
As Jesus had said to his disciples, love one another as I have loved you.
Yeah.
And they loved one another by helping to care for one another, whatever the difficulty they faced.
And whatever the cost, because some of them died,
And so that was one of the things that Wright was talking about in his kind of catalog of pandemics that he put in there, how through the years we've had different pandemics, that it was always in those early years of the Christian faith growing, one of the things that helped it to grow was that those who were Christians did no longer fear death, and so they helped in the pandemic.
Yeah.
They were the ones who cared for the sick,
Yeah.
who took,
Yeah.
and in the process, some died.
Yeah. And you
But
know, one thing that really stood out to me also was that Wright talks about we have to examine our motives. Like if we're just trying to be a superhero, you know, like, oh, we're going to keep doing what we've always done. I mean, we've got to look at the damage that might happen, because this is a pandemic where you could be asymptomatic. 59% of the cases is, you know, comes from, or whatever the statistic is, you know, 59% are asymptomatic, I guess, of the people spreading it. But so you have to be so careful. You know, you could try to be noble, and so you have to examine, okay, I'm going to try to help and put myself at risk, but is that going to cause more harm if I get out there and I do that and I become a carrier and then I expose other people? So you really have to weigh that carefully. You know, the whole thing about do no harm, which is our Wesleyan heritage. Yeah. Yeah, it's a powerful.
I think one of the things that strikes me is how many people really don't pay that much attention to that, and all the folks who talk about having together in worship,
Yeah.
and being in the church,
Mm-hmm.
being all together. Well, that is not really following Jesus. Love one another.
Yeah. In this case, it's not, you know.
As we gather together, we're much more likely to be infecting one another than loving one another.
That's right. We'll be harming each other. You know, one thing I got out of Wright's book too was that we are to be a sign, and the ultimate sign basically is we are the Christ. I mean, we are the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what transforms the world, is when we are being that. And, you know, from now, because we don't want to do harm, we have to do it more from over the phone or the internet or whatever. And some of our younger members are still out there on the front lines, like Amanda Sarles, you know, teaching right now, and
Mm-hmm.
Casey Hand, you know, working in the hospital. So we've got people on the front lines, but there's the American Express, or something. I'm not American Express, Federal Express. Okay. So we have to be, you know, we got to continue, and we'll be talking about that next week. We got to continue in mission to the best we can, however we can work it out during the middle of this crisis, because we don't want to do harm, but yet at the same time, there is so much suffering, you know. And so next week we'll be talking about how do we continue to love and serve in the midst of a pandemic. And so we'll be hearing from some of our people, some of our members who are continuing to serve with very calculated risk, you know, and trying to take all precautions. So is there anything else you can think of that you would like to share today? You know, because we need to wrap up shortly. Can you think of anything you'd like to share about, any other perspectives or anything you want to enlarge on in what you've already shared?
I think one of the things that we always are in prayer for relief of the suffering.
Yes.
We're in prayer for the development of a cure. You know, we have all these specifics, often not recognizing that God answers those prayers through other human beings,
Yeah.
who are doing the work of developing vaccines and treatments,
Mm-hmm.
who are doing the work of easing the suffering of those who have contracted the virus,
Yeah.
or whatever, of those who are trying, excuse me, who are trying to find ways uh, to avoid the spread of the virus.
Yeah.
Those are all things that God is doing through us or through his people, as opposed to some wonderful strike of divine lightning and thunder that just takes care of everything at once.
Yeah.
That is not God at work in most situations, at least. Now, in this adult Sunday school, we're talking about Paul this time on the Damascus Road, and well, he had a very lightning thunder kind of experience.
Yeah.
That isn't usually the way
Yeah.
most of us have an experience.
Yeah.
And that isn't the way God works through most of us, because it is through most of us that God works.
Yeah. Yeah. So God is everywhere working on this. And so that's great. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to be needing to come to a close. I so appreciate your willingness to dialogue with me and to share your thoughts and your perspectives, and I value them so much. And I'm sure, I hope we can do this again, like during Lent or whatever, so we can continue to explore this very profound experience that we're all sharing together of this pandemic.
I think the one thing we need to recognize is that we may come up with an answer at this moment, but something new will happen in the next moment. We need to seek other answers, and there's never any end to seeking, to trying to find, okay, what's the best way to respond to whatever this particular crisis?
Because it changes, and as the virus mutates, the impact on us is going to mutate and change. And now we've got a different response coming from the new administration than what we've had. And so we're going to be having different feelings and responses, in reaction to that. But the main thing I would say is we've just got to remember that we are the hands and the feet of Christ, and that we are how God is at work. Now, most of our congregation, I think our average age is 72. Most of us are retired. We're in high risk. And so, but nonetheless, there's much we can do. And above all, we need to stay aligned and stay in prayer and meditation as we can, praying for the world, praying for our own transformation, continuing transformation and evolution, and pray to be part of what God's doing.
And remember that the focus and the foundation for our responses is living out of faith and hope rather than fear and anxiety.
Yes. Well, we could go off on a whole nother sermon about what Wright was saying at the beginning about, no, this is not a sign of the end times. No, this is not some kind of, like in the prophets in the Old Testament would warn people, you've sinned and this is happening. This is not that. And so that could be a whole nother thing. And because this is so rich, this whole thing, so profound that it's going to take us a while to wrap our little faith heads around it. But thank you so much.
Glad to do it.
Yeah. Okay. You take care. And so we will continue with our worship. Otherwise, okay. Bye-bye.
Will you come and follow me if I but call your name? Will you go where you don't know and never be the same? Will you let my love be shown? Will you prisoners free and never be the same? Will you kiss the leper clean and do such as this unseen, and admit to what I mean in you and you in me? Will you mock, will you hide if I but call your name? Will you quell the fear inside and never be the same? Will you use the faith you found to reshape the world around, through my sight and touch and sound in you and you in me? Lord, your summons echoes true when you but call my name. Let me turn and follow you and never be the same. In your company I'll go, where your love and footsteps show. Thus I'll move and live and grow in you and you in me.
Hi, I'm Carol Salisbury, and one of the questions posed to us by Pastor Karen was how we have survived and gotten through the COVID-19 experience. I will say that initially it was okay to be home because we worked on special projects that we hadn't had time for or made time for before. But after the first 3 or 4 months, it was like, I don't want to do any more projects. However, we had a lot of free time on our hands. So how we survived is every day we take a walk on the beach, and many afternoons we walk around our community here at Klahani. The nice thing was we got to visit with neighbors from a distance, and we were all still feeling safe, and yet we could kibitz about life. We've also read a lot of books and watched a lot of movies. We also made a conscious decision after the first 3 months of lockdown that we were going to see our kids and grandkids. We felt like if maybe this was our last year on the earth, that we weren't going to go without having spent time with the kids. So we've done a lot of praying and just thinking about our church family and hoping that everyone is trying to be positive, because really, what else can you do? Anyway, we're looking forward to the day we can get together again soon. Love to you all. Bye.
For our closing today, I'd like to bring some completion to what we've talked about, what in worship, what we've addressed in worship. In N.T. Wright's wonderful book about God and the pandemic, in his last chapter, Where Do We Go From Here?, he says, the poet Malcolm Geet has caught this brilliantly, reflecting on this last Easter with the churches locked, and on the recent British innovation of people coming out of their houses on Thursday evenings to applaud our courageous healthcare workers. I'm grateful to Malcolm for permission to quote this whole piece. Easter 2020. And this could very well be Epiphany 3, the third Sunday of Epiphany 2021. And where is Jesus this strange Easter day? Not lost in our locked churches anymore. Then he was sealed in that dark sepulchre. The locks are loosened. The stone is rolled away. And he is up and risen long before, alive, at large, and making his strong way into the world he gave his life to save. No need to seek him in his empty grave. He might have been a wafer in the hands of priests this day, or music from the lips of red-robed choristers. Instead, he slips away from church and shakes off our linen bands to don his apron with a nurse. He grips and lifts a stretcher, soothes with gentle hands the frail flesh of the dying, gives them hope, breathes with the breathless, lends them strength to cope. On Thursday, we applauded, for he came and served us in 1,000 names and faces, mopping our sickroom floors and catching traces of that corona, which was death to him. So Good Friday happened in 1,000 places where Jesus held the helpless, died with them, that they might share his Easter in their need. And now they are risen with him, risen indeed. Hear these words of blessing and benediction as you go forth into your life, hopefully transformed by your encounter with the divine. Light has broken into our world of darkness. Open your eyes and your hearts and go forth into the world renewed and filled with confidence on God's new tomorrow. Always God's new tomorrow. Amen.
Mr. President, Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President, Mr. Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.